This is analysis based on publicly available reporting and official documents. This wasn't a procurement dispute. It was a leverage test, because once costs explode and alternatives appear, the real question isn't which jet is better. It is who gets to decide what Canada does next and under what conditions. That question matters now because the answers lock in power relationships for decades. Here is what actually changed and why it cannot be ignored. Canada's fighter replacement plan is built around acquiring 88 new aircraft under the Future Fighter Capability Project. That figure is public and undisputed. It anchors training pipelines, basing decisions, sustainment planning, and long-term budgeting across the Canadian Armed Forces. The Auditor General later reported that estimated costs had risen to $7 billion by 2024. That figure represents roughly a 46% increase over earlier projections. The Auditor General also noted that this total does not include all elements required for full operational capability. That is not a marginal adjustment. That is a structural shift in the program. When the math moves that far, assumptions no longer hold. When assumptions break, leverage dynamics return to the foreground. In Ottawa, defense procurement is not a single purchase order. It is a chain of commitments that stretches across decades. Those commitments include pilot training, simulator infrastructure, maintenance facilities, software upgrades, basing requirements, and sustainment contracts. Once locked in, these commitments shape behavior long after political debates fade. When auditors flag a near 50% increase, that is not politics. It is a forcing function. Canada can absorb the overrun and proceed as planned. Canada can also pause and reassess the program against new financial realities. That reassessment is not anti-American. It is fiduciary responsibility. Reporting linked to the Auditor General's findings places aircraft deliveries on a schedule running from 2026 to 2032. That means this debate is no longer theoretical. Decisions taken now shape Canada's defense posture well into the 2030s and beyond. When timelines tighten and budgets strain, leverage matters more than rhetoric. Sweden enters this story not as an ideological preference. Sweden enters as a variable that alters the bargaining environment. Reporting indicates Saab has floated a package of 72 Gripen fighters plus 6 GlobalEye aircraft. The proposal includes claims of more than 12,000 jobs tied to the combined offer. Governments do not accept job figures at face value. They interrogate them and stress test underlying assumptions. The structure of the proposal is the real signal. It emphasizes visible industrial participation and domestic assembly and sustainment. That distinction matters strategically. Diffuse subcontracting across a global supply chain does not necessarily generate control. Domestic capacity does. This is not only about employment, it is about room to maneuver when conditions deteriorate or politics shift. Once a credible option exists, the leverage landscape changes. Pressure that relied on the absence of alternatives becomes harder to apply. That pressure also becomes more expensive to sustain. Public opinion does not decide defense policy. Public opinion reshapes the political terrain in which decisions are made. Defense procurement is usually elite-driven. Political constraints still apply in democratic systems. A late 2025 ECOS poll found that only 13% of Canadians preferred sticking with an F-35 only path. Larger shares supported switching to Gripen or adopting a mixed fleet. This is not a technical endorsement of one aircraft over another. It is a signal about legitimacy and tolerance for cost escalation. Rising costs combined with limited domestic capacity generate political friction. Governments do not need to follow polls blindly. They cannot ignore the environment those polls create. Decision space narrows into fiscal reality, industrial strategy, and alliance management. At that point, the issue stops being about jets. It becomes about leverage and control. According to CBC reported comments, U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra said that if Canada does not proceed with the planned F-35 purchase, the United States would need to buy more aircraft. He also said those jets could be flown more frequently into Canadian airspace. He suggested that NORAD would have to be altered. There are legitimate operational conversations inside NORAD. Continental defense has always involved coordination across borders. When comments like these are made publicly during a procurement review, they function as a signal. They are not a legal determination. They are a signal about consequences. The signal suggests that reducing dependence may increase uncertainty elsewhere. That is how leverage often operates in alliances. It is applied through friction and unpredictability rather than explicit ultimatums. This is not about claiming violations. It is about recognizing pressure when it appears. Once pressure is communicated, silence is not neutral. Silence is permission. Interoperability is often framed as hardware and software. Some of it is technical. Much of it is discretionary. Discretion determines access, certification, and future permissions. That is why interoperability can become a trap. If one actor controls the gates, integration becomes conditional. Conditional access becomes leverage. Saab argues that Gripen is compatible with common interoperability standards, including Link 16. Saab also points to participation in NATO-related exercises and missions. That does not guarantee seamless access to every system. It does show that incompatibility is not a settled fact. The real choice is not between working with allies and not working with allies. The real choice is how much future access depends on someone else's discretion. In stable partnerships, discretion fades into the background. In transactional partnerships, discretion becomes the weapon. That is the interoperability trap. Canada can stay fully on the F-35 path. Canada can accept the cost growth identified by auditors. Canada can accept that some requirements sit outside the current estimate. That preserves the default relationship. That minimizes near-term friction. Canada can also diversify its fleet and its options. Diversification does not require rupture. A mixed fleet would be a risk management strategy. It would maintain alignment while building alternatives. It would reduce the chance that one supplier defines Canada's future room to maneuver. That path has costs and trade-offs. No option is free. It also carries a strategic advantage. It ends the assumption that Canada has no alternatives. That assumption is what makes pressure cheap. Once alternatives exist, pressure costs more to apply. This is not a dramatic break with the past. Systems change incrementally. They change through procurement reviews, supply chain decisions, and industrial strategy shifts. Each step appears small in isolation. Together, they reshape incentives and behavior. Canada's review is a data point others notice. They notice how pressure is handled when costs rise and options appear. Canada is not questioning alliance membership. Canada is pricing alliance risk. Once risk is priced in, behavior changes quietly. If this is seen only as a debate over jets, the story is missed. The story is that the math changed. The response revealed where leverage sits. Canada's real question is not about aircraft performance. It is about how much decision space Canada wants in the decades ahead. Procurement decisions do not unwind quickly. They lock in relationships. When relationships become transactional, sovereignty is not protected by statements. It is protected by options. From here, the cost of pressure goes up. That changes the math.